The monster at sea. Huge Hurricane Isabel edges closer to the East Coast. It could hit some big cities. CBS News will take you right into the eye of the storm for an exclusive hurricane hunter flight. Also tonight, California's recall called off in a controversial court ruling. What happens now? And Eye on America. A CBS investigation finds still more federal workers being paid six-figure salaries for doing nothing.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Dangerous Hurricane Isabel has veered slightly left and now appears very likely to hit the east coast of the United States somewhere between the Carolinas and New England in just a few days. It figures to have wide-ranging effects far inland beyond the coast, and it will affect the U.S. economy. Still hundreds of miles off Cape Hatteras, Isabel is the largest and strongest hurricane of the season. It has sustained winds of 125 miles an hour at present. They may increase again as it moves northwest at 8 miles an hour. Major cities in the mid-Atlantic states could be in the target zone, and North Carolina's Outer Banks could take a hurricane beating yet again. CBS's Lee Cowan is there to begin our coverage.
Tonight, the entire Atlantic seaboard has become one giant sitting duck. Hurried preparations for what could be a catastrophic storm are already underway, from the coast of the Carolinas to metropolitan New York. Some 25 million people now have reason to worry.
Don't be dumb. I would not stay.
Isabel and her 125-mile-an-hour winds are moving slowly to the northwest, with predictions of landfall sometime Thursday, probably near the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and then pushing north over the Chesapeake Bay.
And we really want people from North Carolina all the way up into southern New England to pay very close attention to this hurricane. It will likely do extensive damage over a large portion of the northeastern United States.
The governor of Virginia has already declared a state of emergency. Mandatory evacuations are in place for some areas of North Carolina's Outer Banks, and if it makes it all the way to northern Pennsylvania, already battered by heavy weekend rains, Isabel's torrential downpours could leave residents looking for higher ground that simply no longer exists. And that's the main worry, because as with Bonnie in 1998 or Floyd a year later, most of the deaths didn't come from high winds, but from water. Isabel could bring a deadly storm surge of between 9 and 12 feet. A wall of water that doesn't creep ashore, it pours in a matter of minutes.
We got so many people concentrated on the shore, living in low-lying areas. If you didn't get out of the way of the storm surge, you'd really drown in your living room watching television.
Pictures. Can't replace these.
Which is why hurricane veterans like Courtney Applewhite are getting out early.
We drove today from Virginia to pack up and go home before the rush gets in here, and it's a madhouse trying to get out.
But Dan, here's why some are tempted not to get out. The eye of Hurricane Isabel now has started to collapse, which is just another sign that the storm is weakening. But forecasters have been saying all along that the storm has been going back and forth, and there is plenty of warm water ahead of it for miles to fuel it before it makes land. Dan?
Lee Cowan reporting live from the Outer Banks of North Carolina. For the latest read on the threat from Isabel, I spoke a short while ago with well-known hurricane expert Brian Norcos of CBS station WFOR in Miami. Brian, Hurricane Isabel is now said to be leaning left a little. Unusual for this kind of hurricane in this location, but what does it mean?
What it means is a bigger threat to the east coast of the U.S., Dan. There's your hurricane down there. What's happened is that high pressure has built out here, and it's acting like a barrier. So instead of the hurricane being able to stay off the east coast, the thinking is it's going to be held close or across the east coast of the U.S. It just doesn't very often happen that we get so strong a high pressure off the east coast that the hurricane can't head out to sea.
Brian, are there hurricanes in the past that are similar to this one?
And one of them back in 1954 was Hurricane Hazel. That came along very much like this one. Came over North Carolina, up over Pennsylvania, and ended up in Toronto, and it killed 80-some people. And then there was a real strong high in 33 that brought a storm up like this, and it went right up the Chesapeake Bay and did considerable damage in Washington and the Norfolk area.
Are there particular issues regarding a hurricane hitting the mid-Atlantic and somewhat above the mid-Atlantic area?
There are not well-developed plans like we have here in South Florida that are part of people's mentality for evacuating, and also the trees that are part of the landscape this time of year, obviously a lot of leaves on the trees all throughout the north, will break at much lower wind speeds than, for instance, trees here in South Florida. So it doesn't take the same kind of wind for a northern storm to get a severe damage that it would take for a Florida storm, for example.
Brian Norcos in Miami, thanks. Of course, no one knows exactly how it will develop, but Hurricane Isabel is potentially one of the most destructive storms ever to threaten the mid-Atlantic coast. Some storm trackers must learn as much as they can about it and where it may be headed. To gather that information, daring crews challenge the elements, flying straight into the eye of the storm. CBS's Mark Strassman went along to give you a look.
Hold on to something. Okay.
These are the hurricane hunters, sent out to pinpoint Isabel's strength and likely path by flying right through this monster storm.
You just never know what's going to happen. You just have to push throttles forward and hope you can stay level. Like now. Like now, yeah.
Outside the C-130, these rings of clouds are Isabel's thunderstorms. And below them, those white caps you see are the Atlantic's roiling waters, clearly visible even from this altitude, because those waves are 45 feet high.
When you see something this big and this powerful, sure, yeah. I mean, anything on the receiving end of that, I just pray for the best.
Right now, we're punching through the eye wall, the ring of the most powerful winds closest to Isabel's center. Up here, those winds are 180 miles an hour. Isabel soars 50,000 feet. Roughly a 10-mile tower of storm. Into the hurricane's core, the plane's crew drops instrument tubes called dropsondes to measure Isabel's power, pressure, and moisture.
That data allows us to know precisely where the storm is centered and what the wind field is like.
That center is here, Isabel's eye. Ringed rows of storm clouds in horizontal tiers. It's called the stadium effect. But 45 miles wide and 10 miles high, this stadium could seat everyone on Earth. Here it's sunny, even serene. But outside the eye, hurricane-force winds extend more than 100 miles in every direction. This crew of Air Force reservists worries for everyone below.
I've never flown one of the more powerful hurricanes like this one with such a big eye.
They're hunting a monster, and they say everyone needs to show it the proper respect. Mark Strassman, CBS News, St. Croix.
The other major story of the day is on the West Coast. A federal appeals court in San Francisco ruled that the California governor recall election, just 3 weeks away, be postponed, and the U.S. Supreme Court may get involved in a final appeal. CBS's Jerry Bowen has the latest turn in this political saga.
California's recall roller coaster jumped the tracks today. The election order delayed until March by a 3-judge federal panel that said punch card voting machines are unreliable, a decision delighting embattled Governor Gray Davis.
I mean, have we seen a few surprises in this election?
One that stunned and outraged his challengers.
It's authoritarian. It is un-American. It is French.
Do you believe the ruling was politically motivated?
I'm sure.
Thank you.
It was the ghost of Florida Chads that stalled the California recall, the Ninth Circuit Court panel citing the Supreme Court's 2000 ruling in the presidential election. While the High Court ruled that Bush won, the panel noted the court also ruled that, quote, using different standards for counting votes in different counties across Florida violated the Equal Protection Clause. Same for California, said the panel, where 6 counties have yet to install required touchscreen voting systems. Using the old punch card ballots could mean that 40,000 votes might not be counted, a margin of error that could be the margin of victory. Proponents expect the decision to stand.
It's clear that a court could not rule against us without effectively reversing Bush versus Gore. That's the principle in Bush versus Gore, that all voters are to have an equal opportunity to have their votes counted.
In San Francisco, voters sorting through the 135 candidates on their absentee ballot said the delay is welcome.
There will be a lot of misvotes on the basis of the ballot that I just saw, so I think it's a great idea to delay it at the very least.
Recent polls indicate support for the recall may be eroding slightly. The delay until the March primary may be just what Davis needs to save his job. The political sprint that brought Bill Clinton to town for Davis and put Schwarzenegger on Oprah Today may now become a marathon with a March 2nd, 2004 finish line, unless yet another ruling puts it back on track. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
In Iraq today, an ambush attack claimed another American life. Rocket-propelled grenades hit a patrol from the Army's 1st Armored Division in Baghdad, fatally wounding one soldier. West of Baghdad, Iraqis mourned a local police chief, a former Iraqi Army officer backed by the U.S. who was gunned down in a roadside attack. And Secretary of State Colin Powell visited Kurdish territory in northern Iraq, where things go comparatively well. Powell's visit included going to a cemetery at the site of a 1998 massacre of Kurds ordered by Saddam Hussein. In San Diego today, a homecoming. The aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson dropped off nearly 2,000 members of its air wing after 8 months at sea. The Vinson and other ships in its battle group will dock Friday at their home port in Bremerton, Washington. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the big city fear. Major hurricanes have been rare in big eastern cities. We'll show you what they can do. As Hurricane Isabel bears down on the U.S. East Coast, coastal residents in South Korea are cleaning up after a giant typhoon. It was the most powerful such storm in South Korea's history, with 135-mile-an-hour winds that capsized ships and heavy rain that washed away bridges, killed about 100 people, and left thousands homeless. What happened in South Korea underscores one of the greatest fears about Hurricane Isabel hitting a big East Coast city in this country. It would not have to be a very strong hurricane to cause major damage, and some cities are already taking steps. CBS's Bob Orr reports history indicates this early move to action could be a wise move.
When hurricanes turn north toward the mid-Atlantic coast, they often look like this. Agnes in 1972 was a minimal hurricane, but a prolific rainmaker. Floods from Georgia to New York killed more than 100 people and caused $3 billion in damages. This boathouse on the Potomac River, 80 miles inland, was nearly underwater.
This is the high water mark of Agnes in 1972.
How far above the Potomac level is this?
It's approximately 24 feet.
That's hard to imagine.
Well, it happens.
Now, forecasters are warning it could happen again.
Each track still impacts our area, no matter which one you go by.
Emergency managers from Boston to Washington are anxious.
This storm certainly has an eye on the District of Columbia. It has had that eye on the District of Columbia for over a week.
Forecasters warn if Isabel remains strong, high winds could seriously damage skyscrapers in East Coast cities. And if the hurricane makes a direct hit on New York, a storm surge could flood parts of Manhattan and the city's subway system. This animation, posted on the National Hurricane Center's website, suggests even a Category 2 storm could fill the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel with more than 10 feet of water. Forecasters also worry, since the mid-Atlantic seaboard is not hit as often as Florida and the Gulf states, people in heavily populated cities may not heed the warnings.
If people are not careful, people will die. I mean, it's as simple as that. People have got to use common sense.
Even if the storm loses some of its punch, forecasters warn there'll be significant danger and a potential for flooding. In cities all along the East Coast now, flood walls and sandbags are going up as Isabel takes aim. Bob Orr, CBS News, Washington.
With so many Americans so desperate for work, why is the U.S. government paying this woman big money for doing nothing? The answer later in tonight's Eye on America.
On a collision course, as ferocious Hurricane Isabel bears down on the U.S. coast, are major Northeast cities overdue for a direct hit? He thinks so. Tomorrow, what scientists working last winter learned about predicting big storms. That plus Isabel's latest moves on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
President Bush had his spokesman today announce $9 billion in U.S. loan guarantees for Israel with a big string. The guarantees will be cut by any amount the Israeli government spends on settlements in the Palestinian territories. One senior U.S. official tells CBS News not to rule out putting similar pressure on Israel over the controversial security fence it is building in the West Bank, as CBS's Alan Pizzi reports.
Good fences, it is said, make good neighbors, but a security fence that will snake for hundreds of miles between Israelis and Palestinians is having the opposite effect. Israelis pushing for the fence to be built faster point out that no suicide bombings have happened in areas where it's already up.
It's the simplest and the best self-defense measure. We need it after more than 1,000 days of terrorism and violence.
But Palestinian farmers believe the razor wire sensors, patrol roads, and locked gates are there to steal their land. From his roof, Jamal Othman can see but not reach olive groves owned and nurtured by his family for generations. He says it is worse than a death in the family. You can bury a human being and get over it, Jamal laments, but this land is dead and not buried. It is in front of me 24 hours a day. In some places, the fence becomes a wall, and even those it protects compare it to the Berlin Wall.
It's true that it gives us a feeling of safety. On the other hand, I don't think this facade is very friendly to anyone.
Palestinians believe the fence is an attempt to delineate a border to include Israeli West Bank settlements, effectively pre-shrinking any Palestinian state negotiated under the U.S. roadmap for peace. The security barrier is also a source of friction between Washington and Israel. U.S. law prohibits American money being used to build or protect Israeli settlements on the West Bank. So a $9 billion guaranteed loan package could be reduced by any amount the Israelis spend using this fence to secure those settlements. The cost of the wall has been put at $2 million a mile, which its backers call a bargain. But for Palestinian farmers stuck on the wrong side when the Israeli military doesn't show up to let them go home, even a ride to the next gate from a security truck doesn't make them feel like they've got good neighbors. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, the West Bank.
On the CBS Market Watch, Wall Street found the latest reports about the U.S. economy decidedly uninspiring. Stocks closed lower. The Dow lost nearly 23 points. The Nasdaq gave up 9. If you lost money in the market today, well, our next story won't make you feel any better. CBS shows you where some of your tax dollars are going. Get ready to be outraged. Eye on America in a moment. Here's a quick look at the week ahead here on the CBS Evening News. This is the broadcast to watch for hurricane coverage. Where Isabel goes, we'll go. Plus, we'll show you how scientists are digging into history to try to predict hurricanes. And we'll look at the no-holds-barred battle Kobe Bryant's lawyers are waging against the woman who accused him of rape. We end tonight with a look at how some of your tax dollars are being spent. Earlier this year, CBS's Cheryl Atkinson uncovered the story of a federal worker being paid a 6-figure salary for doing nothing. It turns out he was not the only one. Cheryl has dug up a follow-up, investigating for tonight's Eye on America.
When Congress was looking to make the National Institutes of Health more efficient, Joyce Sweezy came to the rescue. A top supply manager at NIH, she offered an idea to cut waste and save taxpayers $2 million a year. It's one reason her boss then reassigned her, but it was no promotion.
I was given absolutely no work to do.
Sweezy claims her boss was angry because her cost savings plan exposed waste in his branch. He says she was repeatedly insubordinate, but she never imagined her punishment would be a do-nothing assignment with taxpayers forking out her paycheck.
My gross salary was over $100,000 a year.
What were you thinking?
How can they continue to pay me? I'm not doing anything.
Rosemary Cummings was also a high-level manager at NIH.
I was wanting to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and staying till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Weekends I'd be there.
But that all came to a sudden halt when she, too, got a transfer from her position in charge of 130 people.
How would you contrast that job with the one that you were then assigned to?
A nothing. A nothing.
Doing nothing, she says, but still earning plenty.
Over $100,000 a year.
On the taxpayer's dime. With nothing to do, Joyce Sweezy became depressed and desperate. She even offered to do the clerk's photocopying. She took her case to an employment judge who said her boss was justified in transferring her, but not to a do-nothing job with less than 3 hours of work over 2 years. The judge called that illegal retaliation and blamed her boss, the same man who gave Rosemary Cummings nothing to do, a top NIH official, Lehman Lee. The judge found Lee has a history of taking reprisal action against workers, but his career hasn't seemed to suffer. Raynard Kington, NIH's #2 official, won't talk about Lehman Lee, but insists managers like Lee are punished when they do wrong. As to how many employees complain they're in do-nothing jobs, he says there's no epidemic.
We know that there are allegations like this that get resolved. The important thing is it's resolved.
Sweezy won a $200,000 judgment against NIH for suffering the do-nothing job, but says the lost years decimated her career. As for Cummings, she left her highly paid position to begin a much busier early retirement.
Looking at this as a taxpayer, if other people are looking at it as a taxpayer, what are your thoughts?
My thought is, what a waste.
A waste of time, talent, and taxpayer dollars. In Bethany Beach, Delaware, I'm Cheryl Atkinson for Eye on America.
Your tax dollars at work, part of our world tonight. CBS News is all over this hurricane story, so stay with us on television, radio, and the internet, and with this CBS station for steady, reliable coverage of this potentially very dangerous storm. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, log on to cbsnews.com. What can a frozen lake bed teach us about hurricanes? Plenty. Tomorrow, experience CBS News.